who's worked so diligently and hard on this legislation for such time as he may consume.
Thank you.
Gentleman
Thank
is
you, Mr.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate all your help on this particular bill and the committee's help as well. It's been a priority of ours. I rise today in support of H.R. 1222, the Congenital Heart Futures Reauthorization Act, as amended by the Senate, which will ensure continued investment in surveillance research to evaluate the lifelong needs of individuals with congenital heart defects, or CHD. These surveillance efforts will help improve our understanding of CHD across the lifespan from birth to adulthood. This research will help us learn more about demographic factors such as age, race, gender, and or ethnicity. In addition, the legislation emphasizes the need for continued biomedical research at the National Institutes of Health on the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of CHD. NIH will further research into the causes of congenital heart defects, including genetic causes, and study long-term outcomes in individuals with CHD of all ages. NIH may study data to identify effective treatments and outcomes, and identify barriers to lifelong care for individuals with congenital heart defects. CHD is the most common birth defect and the leading cause of birth defect-related infant mortality. For the Down syndrome community, about half of the children born with Down syndrome have CHD. The road ahead may be scary and uncertain for any parent with a newborn who has CHD, but this bill gives hope to those coping with the diagnosis. Nearly 1 in 100 babies, Mr. Speaker, are born with CHD, and more than 5% will not live to see their first birthday. We have to fix that. Despite its prevalence and significance, there are still gaps in research and standards of care for CHD patients. But for the sake of the estimated 40,000 babies who will be born in the next year with CHD, there's more work to be done. Mr. Speaker, I began on this journey almost 10 years ago with my good friend, then Congressman Zach Space. So what we did is we first introduced the Congenital Heart Futures Act back in 2009. Last Congress, Congressman Schiff and I introduced the reauthorization of the original law. During this time, I met with a lot of patients with congenital heart defects, and I've been touched by their stories. People like Trey and Nicole Flynn, a young Florida couple who lost their son Holden while waiting for a heart transplant. He was 2 years old. This bill supports the essential research necessary to make sure another family doesn't have to leave the hospital without their child in their arms. Lucas Igina, a young man born with a complex congenital heart defect that essentially left him with half a heart. Despite having 3 open heart surgeries and countless doctor's visits and medical procedures, Lucas has hopes and dreams. This bill ensures that the medical research will keep pace with his generation as they grow to be adults with this complex illness. Jackson Radent, born with half a heart. He has hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which means the left side of his heart was underdeveloped. He depended on life-saving research to help his failing heart survive until his heart transplant at the age of 11. He's about 16 years old now, Mr. Speaker, and he will live his life with a heightened sensitivity for his new heart. Nicholas B. He was born with a complex heart disease and wasn't getting blood to the lower part of his body, requiring heart surgery when he was just 2 days old. He now is in the top of his class, and this bill will ensure that his future remains bright as he navigates this chronic illness through adulthood. Who knows, Nicholas may be a congressman one day. Abigail Adams, very familiar name. A young Florida advocate with Down syndrome. Roughly half of the babies born with Down syndrome have a congenital heart defect. Abigail continues to advocate for individuals with Down syndrome. My friend Dave. Dave was born with pulmonary stenosis, a condition where a heart valve will not open properly. He had emergency open heart surgery when he was 2 days old, another surgery at the age of 10, and many hospital visits and procedures in the meantime. Today, he's a husband and a father of 2, but he lives with atrial flutter. This bill will continue the surveillance program so we can collect data on children and adults with congenital heart problems. And Carolyn H., born with tetralogy of Fallot, with pulmonary atresia. She had an open heart surgery when she was 10 years old to repair her heart, but she will need periodic surgical updates to replace the cadaver artery. This bill continues the NIH research into why these defects occur. These are just some of the patients that I've met over the years, Mr. Speaker, many, 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 many more. And lastly, I want to thank some of the advocates that work with me on getting this legislation passed. I want to thank Dave Peluso. I want to thank David Kasnick. I want to thank Amy Baskin, Dr. Brad Marino, and Jessica Schinnervert from the Pediatric Congenital Heart Association. I also want to thank Mark Roeder and Danielle Howe from the Adult Congenital Heart Association. Also, Vince Randazzo, Sarah Weir, and Nicole Patton for the National Down Syndrome Society. Again, most importantly, I want to thank our chairman for getting this through. So thank you very much. I urge swift passage of this life-saving bill. Let's get to the president as soon as possible. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.